Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
We've been discussing, of course, the Supreme Court's ruling against those IEEPA tariffs has thrown into question what that is going to mean for some of the tariff revenue that the U.S. government has already collected. As you can see there, IEEPA really accounts for the majority of the trade remedy revenue that the U.S. is raking in. That's estimated to be at about $260 billion. So let's discuss with Nobel Laureate in economics, Paul Krugman. He is research professor of economics at the City University of New York's Graduate Center. Paul, it's great to have you with us. So let's talk about that, because as we know, when it comes to the tariff revenue, that was an important pillar of the economic agenda of this administration. If you take out the lion's share of that revenue in the form of these IEEPA tariffs, where does that leave that agenda?
Well, I don't actually think the revenue was a key part of the agenda. I think it was part of the case that the Trump administration made for the tariffs, but I don't think it was really their motivation. That said, okay, we're looking, I believe, now at losing revenue that's around 0.6% of GDP, which is something like a tenth of the budget deficit. So the budget deficit gets about 10% bigger as a result of this ruling, unless, in many ways, the other stuff that Trump was saying he's going to do is not, from his point of view, a good substitute for IEEPA. But it could replace a good part of the revenue. I actually think that's all really pretty secondary. But that's, in some ways, the revenue is the least of the issues.
Well, in your view, then, what is the big issue here? I mean, obviously, there's a myriad that we could name, but what comes to mind to you as most urgent?
Well, the reason that Trump went with IEEPA when he was warned that it might not hold up in court, right? There was a big risk, everybody understood, of what just happening. And the reason he went with that, as opposed to other more conventional trade, tariffs, aside from the fact that he needed something that didn't have to pass Congress, because Congress wouldn't have approved his tariffs. But the point about, what does IEEPA say about the conditions under which you can impose tariffs? And the answer is, it says nothing. The legislation doesn't even mention tariffs. And because it was so, not really about tariffs, Trump took it as a license to impose tariffs whenever he felt like it. He used it as a license to impose tariffs on Brazil because they convicted Jair Bolsonaro. He took it as a license to threaten Europe with tariffs because they sent troops to Greenland. And the other things that are out there, which might be able to replace the revenue, will not give him the same amount of discretion. And of course, that also implies, trade deals. Yeah. All of the trade deals that were made on the basis of, we will scale back the IEEPA tariffs that we imposed on you if you give us the following things, are now null and void, because he doesn't have that discretion anymore.
Well, I am curious, Paul, though. I don't know if you had a chance to actually see the press conference that Trump had a couple hours ago in response to the ruling. And just not so much what he said, but also some of the emotion behind it. But after he spoke, we saw several administration officials on various social media platforms talk about the alternatives, in their view, that they could use to not only keep these tariffs in place in some form or another, but to actually maybe increase them as a way for the president to get the leverage that, in his view, he needs to get the things he wants done.
Yeah, well, look at what he just said with the Section 122 tariffs, which is, that's a very, I never thought anybody would invoke that. It's really kind of a Bretton Woods era thinking. It's actually post, but anyway, but it's a flat 10% tariff on everything. Mm-hmm. That's very, very different from saying, I'm doing 50% on Brazil because I don't like what they're doing domestically. It's very different from saying, I'm going to go after France, Germany, and the UK because I don't like what they're doing in Greenland. So although it may be able to replace the revenue, he may be able to collect enough money from these other tariffs that the revenue hole is filled, although I don't think that exonerates him from having to refund the money already collected. Yeah. But he may be able to replace the revenue, but he doesn't regain the flexibility.
Forgive me for being pedantic, but did this really plug a revenue hole, or am I missing something? We saw the deficit
it's some revenue. It's a tax.
A tax on who?
The Trump tariffs in general.
Do you know how many tariffs I've paid? If I order something overseas, I get a message from FedEx or DHL or something else. I mean, that's not coming out of the pockets of people overseas.
Well, no, it's not. It's no. This is a sales tax. I mean, a tariff is in the end a sales tax. It's there's a lot of moving parts in the way that works out, but it's in the end. And so this was the Trump tariffs are about, in total, the tariff increase is around 0.9% of GDP.
Okay, but
so
if that's coming out of the pockets of the American people, does not potentially have a drag on economic activity, even if it does benefit the actual government coffers itself? I mean, I am the government to a certain extent. You are. We all are.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's a little bit, and if you actually kind of work it through, but because it's a tax hike, the tariffs are slightly contractionary. Maybe more than slightly. That's one of those things where you have to ask what else is going on. But how does this affect the Fed? I mean, if the tariffs weren't there, the Fed would probably have lowered rates already, and so on. But it is a significant increase in the cost of living, not a gigantic increase in the cost of living, but everybody's cost of living is somewhat higher because of these tariffs. Mm-hmm. And that will go away, but these other tariffs would also be a tax on the American people.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, Paul, we only have about a minute left, but you said that will go away in reference to the cost of living. And I want to ask you about your confidence there, because when a company, raises prices, they tend to be sticky. Do you have confidence that, some of the corporations that have raised prices in response to tariffs actually will lower them?
Well, that's always a question. But, we have ongoing inflation running at about 3% a year. So all that has to happen is for companies not to raise prices as much as they would have. So all of this plays out a little bit over the course of, let's say, a year. So I don't have much doubt that we will, in fact. But, of course, if this is a net reduction in tariffs, because Trump is basically proposing a new set of tariffs to make up for the loss of the old one. So any consumer relief may be very short-lived here.
All right, Paul, always appreciate your insights. Paul Krugman over at the CUNY's Graduate Center and, of course, Nobel Laureate in economics.